So it's been a couple of weeks now since this post came out uh, regarding mouse keys changes and clarification. More importantly, the blanket ban on auto hotkey, and somehow a lot of the community reaction to it has still been overly negative, which is something that I disagree with. It's been very negative community reaction. It's been based largely around an emotional reaction with maybe not quite as much willingness to see the other side of the argument, willingness to see why jagex would do what they have done, and instead it's been largely based on just saying, oh no, jagex is making the wrong move, they're idiots. And so I'd like to make some kind of effort to maybe sort of explain why I think that jagex have 100% made the correct move in doing what they've done. Because I believe that what they have done is the best move for the game going forwards and is overall more beneficial than allowing the status quo to be maintained. So the statement itself is mostly centered around, the bolded statements, as you'd expect. So in the past, they allowed limited usage of AutoHotkey and other similar programs, and they are now disallowing it. And I think this is a very important distinction to be made. A lot of people seem to be sort of coming out and saying, oh, how dare they ban it, how dare they not allow it, when in fact in the first place they had never explicitly allowed these sorts of things to be used. It had always been more of a sort of, they don't disallow it because it was relatively harmless and not too much was sort of going on with any sort of nefarious usages of it. But as time has gone on and as the community as a whole has become more aware of the existence of AutoHotkey and what it can be used for, the usage of it has obviously skyrocketed, and I'd imagine the people using it for macroing has probably skyrocketed. And so they sort of had to come out and release a statement saying, alright, it's not okay, we don't want people using this, we are going to ban it. Which is pretty fair enough. This statement would have mostly come from probably Matt K and Weth, even though this was posted by Ronan, that's probably just part of his job. The actual statement itself and the decision to make it would have been by Matt K, the product manager, and Weth, the brand protection specialist. I think that's his official title. So it would have come from them, and I believe they made the correct decision. So they made this post, and then there was the Q&A where there was this video put up. For some reason this live stream isn't on YouTube. I don't know why, it's kind of weird. And then a couple of days later there was this post made on the 2007 Scape comments, whatever all this crap is, subreddit by Matt K. And this post in particular seems to be where a lot of the vitriol towards jagex's actions has been directed, and I believe this is ill-founded and just generally inaccurate. The main statement that people are going after is this one here. So he said, firstly, do I have an in-depth understanding of AHK, of how AHK is used in the game? No, I do not. And it seems a lot of people kind of stopped reading the comment there and just sort of said, oh, Matt K's an idiot, he doesn't know anything, I'm going to ignore him because he's an idiot, he doesn't know anything. And that's just an extremely dismissive sort of attitude to take towards things and is not constructive whatsoever in sort of creating an argument or anything like that. It's the equivalent of looking at AutoHotkey and saying, oh yeah, ban that because it has auto in the front of it. It displays a similar kind of maturity, honestly, to not really be willing to see their standpoint. Because as he goes on to say, it's not his job to know that. He's the product manager. It's not his job to know every tiny little specific thing. It's his job to create a team of people who know those sorts of things. And in particular, Mod Weth would be the person he would be relying on to know about have an in-depth understanding of how AHK is used in the game. And to draw attention to that, I'd like to play a short segment of the live stream to sort of illustrate the point, so I'm going to shut up and play this.
Investigated it, looked what was going on, and I had a conversation with Modweath, and I said to him, so what is the actual issue? What is the problem? What do you do? And he showed me this this report that we got in, and he showed me that it looks exactly the same as a normal bot. And he's like, well, the reason why it happened is because we didn't spot this was AHK, but it looks exactly the same as a bot botting. And it's like, and so sort of sat there and thought, what we've effectively done with AHK by allowing it to be used is we've created this legitimate way of botting because the impact is exactly the same as a bot. So it's like, what do we do? Do we allow people to use AHK to do what another bot does? The simple answer is no, we can't do that. AHK got to a stage where we got so lax on it that it was effectively a legitimate way of botting the game. And at the end of the day, we can't allow that to happen. So we had to make the call that we can't allow AHK to continue doing that. So you guys are asking us for a clear answer to it. We came up with a clear answer, which is effectively, you can't use it. Simple as that.
So, yep, simple as that. They saw a tool that was in the past used for fairly non-malicious usages, but over time they saw that changed and people started to use it to macro a lot more and decided, alright, let's get rid of it. And this was based on the evidence supplied to banahk by Modweath. And it makes a lot of sense because historically that's the stance they've taken on quite a few third-party tools. I believe that the fact that it's a third-party tool is the major reason why they refuse to allow it in the first place, because it's something that they cannot control. It's something that they have no control over, and so they cannot guarantee the reliability of it. They cannot guarantee that it will not compromise you in any sort of way whatsoever. And so, I mean, personally, I've always justified that part to myself as, you know, AHK is free and open source. I think it's licensed under the GPL, so you're not getting much more transparent than that. But at the same time, it's still a third-party tool being used by people in order to gain an advantage in game, and they do not want to allow that. The other important distinction to be made is that while, yes, a lot of people didn't use AHK bad, it doesn't mean that there isn't potential for people to use it in bad ways, and in the past they have acted against those sorts of tools. For example, if you log into the game using a botting client, you are at risk of being banned. Even if you don't run a script on the botting client, logging into the game through that client still puts you at the risk of being banned, and I know at least one person in the past who has faced the consequences of this. Shout out to Kaji for being an idiot. And the other sort of example of this is back before when the GE was implemented years ago, and a couple of years ago, people used to use autotypers in order to sell their stuff in World 1 for Rock. And a lot of the time with these autotypers would come other tools, so like auto clickers or whatever, and those were something that Jagex didn't want people to use, and so by disallowing or by creating an in-game solution to that autotyper, it probably reduced the amount of people who had access to the auto clicker, which was what they saw as the genuinely bad part. Autotyping itself was probably largely harmless, but they managed to probably reduce the amount of people who were accessing an auto clicker and using it by creating an in-game autotyper. And it's this sort of desire to create an in-game solution rather than rely on a third-party tool that also probably drives their decision making to a large extent. They don't like the idea that players are quote-unquote being forced to use a third-party tool in order to make the game more bearable. From their point of view, it's a lot more beneficial for them to go out and make changes to the game in order to, so that those sorts of things aren't needed. So rather than balancing the game around third-party tools, they'd rather balance the game by themselves natively. And a lot of people are also getting up in arms about the whole Windows mouse key segment of it. when they don't want people to be using Windows mouse keys to do the same sorts of things that people were doing with AHK, because again, that's not why mouse keys exist. Mouse keys exist so that people who can't move their wrists or arms or whatever, so like cerebral palsy, can play the game to a basic degree. It's not there so that people can play the game better. They'd rather implement an in-game solution that allows people to continue to play the game better. They've displayed a certain amount of willingness to go after these sorts of in-game solutions. And I believe that is the correct kind of path to be taking. The most popular one in the community seems to be shift-clicking to drop items, which, I mean, is certainly an option. I don't think is the best option, because it's a relatively sort of... It's just not the same way, because in RuneScape things are classically accessed through menus, not through modifier keys. I mean, there's already a couple of modifier keys in game, like control-click to run and alt-click to move camera, but I'd imagine they'd rather sort of keep the same clicking and menu-based interface and sort of feeling to the game, which I agree with. And the one solution that I've seen that I liked was post our lovely pal over here, Jebram, where he agrees that they made the right decision, and he proposed this sort of solution where you'd click an item and then you would press a button in order to activate or move the mouse to the operation. So, for example, say if I was doing something and I wanted to drop these cannonballs, rather than move my mouse down to drop, I would right click and I'd press F1 and it would activate, well, that would probably activate the use, and if I were to right click and press F2, it would activate the drop operation. And I think this is a fairly reasonable solution that's in line with other things in the game, such as the pressing 1 to access that menu or whatever sort of thing. And so it makes sense to kind of go after that sort of solution rather than creating something like shift click or creating jagex keys, as people are calling it. I see that one in particular as extremely unlikely due to the fact that I don't think there's any other content in the game that takes control of your cursor and moves it around. So they would obviously be very cautious to implement that sort of solution. And so I think that this solution over here is a good idea. At least the best idea that I've seen. And I believe it's the best action that they could do going forward in order to please the most people, because as it stands right now you've got kind of two camps of people. You've got the people against it being allowed and the people for it being allowed, and honestly both of those camps of people have some absolutely terrible arguments and are coming from some pretty terrible places. For example, the people who are against it are for the generalized majority lower level players, who are quite suspiciously very much in favour of in-game updates that make things easier, a lot easier than auto-hotkey would be. For example, the spacebar to skip dialogue update, which was ostentatiously put in for the reason of I don't want to read quest dialogue, I just want to hold down spacebar once, press it once and hold it down in order to skip multiple lines of dialogue. I just want to be able to macro through the dialogue, basically. It had a lot of unintended or side effects, such as ease of teleporting, ease of accessing menus, particularly with construction, where the action of moving down to the dialog box, clicking it, and then moving up was previously one action, but now instead you just press 1, press spacebar, it does the action for you, and it's a lot less effort. But I think the fact that it's native within the game client is what makes it so appealing and so much more rational than the usage of a third-party tool in order to accomplish the same sort of thing. But then at the same time, you have the people on the other side of the argument who want it allowed, who are for the majority using an absolutely terrible argument of but people have been using it for years. And this kind of appeal to tradition argument sucks dick, and it should never be used because it's the exact same kind of thing that the people who are against AHK went after people for in relation to things such as 6-hour training methods, wherein people were saying, oh, but we've been using this method for months already, why should it be removed? It's part of the game. And yet Jagex had the foresight to go ahead and remove something like that rather than just allowing it because, it had always been allowed. Same as autotypers. It had never really been bannable, and a lot of people had used it over the years, and so they had always banned it, but they went more militant on terms of banning it and implemented an in-game solution to it in order to just kind of clean things up and make things a lot nicer, really. Advancing the game in a positive direction, trying to overcome the honestly quite terrible way of interaction with the game client. And I think that's a big positive, especially if I personally wouldn't care if they outright banned the usage of any sort of mouse moving tools, because it is kind of bad, because it would allow for a large scale increase of player skill, which is good. And even if it's interacting with a terrible interface, it's still encouraging the players to go out of their way and get better at the game rather than using what is a third-party tool in order to not have to do it. And I think that kind of sums up most of my sort of arguments. I think that they've made the right move in outright disallowing the usage of HK. I think it's still in a sort of transitional stage, so if you're using AHK like mouse keys, you're not going to be banned. If you're using AHK like a shithead, you're probably more likely to be banned than before, but I can't be sure of that, don't take my word for that. And I hope that they continue to sort of pursue the issue in the future and implement some sort of in-game solution to it, such as, pressing a key in order to activate a right-click op, I think is the best one. Shift-click wouldn't be too bad, but I wouldn't want it for just drop because there's a lot more going on in the game than dropping items, and that sort of seemed like a very stopgap solution, very temporary one that they'd have to sort of expand upon in the future, and so that wouldn't be very good. And yeah, basically you're all idiots for calling Matke an idiot. He made the right move without a doubt.